You guys are probably watching by now. My laptop hasn't caught up. But hello, it's illumignostic, and I did a live stream a week or so ago about my childhood, and people asked me how I ended up in the Amazon. So I decided to go ahead and, what is going on here? What is this? What is that? Oh, sorry guys, I had the wrong camera on. There we go. Now you can see I'm obviously in the Amazon, right? So people asked how I got here, and I've decided to go ahead and share some of the story. Unfortunately, because I'm in the Amazon, sometimes I can't get things that I need, and a phone charger is that thing at the moment. And so we only have about 45% battery. We'll see how far we get into the story. So in, I guess it was like 2016, the outlaw marijuana industry, of which I was a part, had begun to crumble due to the effects of legalization. The price plummeted. And I had just spent a few years building myself up to the point where I was a grower with my own plot. And so it was absolutely terrible timing. On top of that, the state, I guess, their excuse was that they were trying to control, what is it, a thistle? And so they had gone around and sprayed russet mites all over the sides of the road. And so it was clearly about marijuana eradication. And I mean, it was a terrible thing to do. But russet mites were new, and they present in the plant as if there's a nitrogen deficiency. So I went crazy trying to figure out what to do about, the plants just looked like they were nitrogen deficient, and I couldn't. There's nothing wrong with the pH of the soil. I know, my mix is good. Like it was awful. So between the very steep drop in price and the russet mite infestation that I eventually did get control of, I didn't do quite as well as I would have liked, and regardless of that, it didn't matter much because while I was out of town, my partners basically cleaned out all of my money. So that's kind of how I ended up sort of dashed amongst the rocks in Northern California. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. My mom had moved to Ecuador many years ago, and our relationship was never very good. So I hadn't spoken with her in like 8 years, I guess. And I don't remember how the contact actually happened, but somehow we ended up talking. And I knew that we were about to harvest and I would have some money, and there's nothing to do for the winter. So I thought, well, let's go to Ecuador and see if I can patch things up with my mom and check out the Amazon rainforest, which I had absolutely been fascinated with since I was a very small child. I read One River by Wade Davis, who was a student of Richard Evans Schultes, who is sort of, I am in Hawaii, Ecuador. And, it was just a subject of deep fascination for me. Whenever there were documentaries on the television about the rainforest, I would always watch them, and I just absolutely... it should be probably pointed out for those of you that don't know my background, we were dirt poor. I mean, there was no running water in our house, bullet holes in the windows when we moved in. Inbred rednecks, the police, hey Shane, sometimes wouldn't come if you called them because they would shoot at the cops. Oh, you're on Pocal Drive? What? I'm sorry, you're breaking up, click, So I kind of had this imprint growing up that traveling was something that only rich people did, you know. And I lived in a very wealthy, affluent area, so I would go to school with kids, and they would talk about, you know, their skiing trip in Breckenridge or whatever, and I would think, wow, I can't imagine actually getting to travel to somewhere like Colorado. You know, it was like halfway across the U.S. Um, Man, poverty is really bad for you guys. I strongly, you know, advise against it. It really isn't good, because I really believed that you know, I couldn't travel, you know, until I had done it. I just went and did it. So so yeah, so I'd always wanted to visit the Amazon. I don't know that I had really considered living in the Amazon. Um, that kind of came out of nowhere. But basically, what happened is I started talking to my mother, who lived in a town in the Andes, so not in the jungle, in Malacatos, Ecuador, and I came to visit them, and it was great. I finally got to go to the jungle. I found a local shaman that I ended up working with for years. And after maybe the third ceremony or so, I said, you know, I've always wanted to see the Amazon. And he said, oh, well, we're going this weekend, so you can come along with us. And so I did. And it's just as amazing as you would imagine it to be if you've never been here. I mean, there are remarkable creatures of all sorts everywhere you look. You know, vast biodiversity in the plants. There are orchids all over the place in the jungle, especially in the foothills on the way to the jungle, where the Andes, you're sort of dropping down into the jungle. There are more and more orchids as you get into the jungle, very, very large ones. The hillsides are completely covered in blooms. Waterfalls just everywhere because it rains all the time and there are mountains. So there are waterfalls everywhere. And so we went out into the jungle, and we did a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, and they were absolutely grueling because we fasted from the time that we left Vilcabamba, which is like an 8-hour, 9-hour bus ride to Gualaquiza, where we hiked out to a house that I think it was like a 2-hour hike or something like that. And then, you know, still fasting. And when we got there, we drink the ayahuasca, and then after maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep, wake up, hike through the jungle, where, you know, a little sip of ayahuasca first, and then hiking through the jungle again. And it's very difficult to hike through the jungle because it's mud. It rains all the time, so it's just muddy, and it was a mountainous area of the jungle. So, you know, we're trekking through this mud, and we haven't eaten and very little sleep. And that was amazing too. You know, there was a datura, the toei. Well, it's not actually datura; it's brumansia. But the toei plant. At one point, I remember we entered into a forest of it. There was just nothing but toei for, you know, 1/8 of a mile or something. And so we hiked back to these amazing giant waterfalls that the Shuar, who are the local indigenous people. How's it going, Dean? The local indigenous people really revere, the Shuar really revere waterfalls. There are water spirits that they say live at all of them, and when you drink with like Miguel Chiriop, for example, who's probably the most well-known Shuar shaman, and actually the teacher of my teacher, he just, you know, anytime that he starts speaking, the conversation always goes to the waterfalls. You know, they're just ubiquitous in their thoughts, and it's just so central to the lives of the Shuar people. And so drinking for the first time in the Amazon was an incredible experience, because it's like you're in the heart of the Gaian mind. How's it going, Math? You are really in there with all of these beings, all of the nature. I at some point in the night, it was pretty late. The ayahuasca actually sort of forced me to go out into the jungle, which she did by manipulating my organs, which was a crazy experience to realize that this medicine could actually get a hold of your biology and sort of work you like a puppet almost. I mean, not like to the extent of like forcing movements or anything, but I really had to go to the bathroom. First I had to vomit, and I like coughed up these balls of almost like semi-solid foam. It was the weirdest thing. Still to this day, I have no idea what the hell that was. And so then I walked down the porch, and I get to these bushes that I don't know why I felt like that would be a good place to vomit, but I suddenly felt like I was going to vomit, and I vomited up this huge, just gallons and gallons it seemed like. And as this was happening, all these negative thoughts and like this black sort of trails, that the thoughts were somehow inside of this darkness. They were all coming up, and I could hear, almost like on fast forward, the memories that had created the traumas that I was vomiting up. And after all this vomiting, I thought, my God, I haven't eaten in 2 days. Where did you get all of that? And I hear Pachamama, the ayahuasca voice, say, the same place I got all of this. And again, I'm vomiting and vomiting and vomiting and vomiting and vomiting, which, still to this day has really sort of reinforced the belief that somehow it is possible to turn this energy into something physical and expel it from the body, which is what seemed to happen. And I was really fighting going into the jungle because it was dark and I was tripping, and it just seemed like a crazy thing to do. And so, I'm having this dialogue with ayahuasca through this whole ordeal, and she's saying, do you really think I would bring you out here all this way just to have a snake bite you and die? Just go into the jungle. And I was like, no. And she's like, when was the last time a mosquito bit you? And I realized that since I had started hearing this voice, the bugs were not bothering me at all. She's like, this is my jungle. These are my creatures. Nothing is going to harm you. Just go into the jungle. So I went into the jungle, and suddenly... and the way that she was forcing me is that's where we were supposed to go to the bathroom. And I could not, I had to go, but I couldn't. And it really, I felt like she had just clinched me up so that it was not an option. And as soon as I got into the jungle, I was allowed, to use the bathroom. And so I had this experience where, when I was looking for somewhere to sit, the whole floor of the jungle is just moving. There's all these beetles and ants and glowing leaves that I later discovered were from the Noya Rao, which is a plant teacher, a very important medicinal plant and it has bioluminescent leaves. So they had fallen to the jungle floor. So, the floor is glowing, it's moving everywhere, and I find a fallen log, and I'm like, okay, well, I can sit on that. And I shine my light on it, and it's 100 beetles and all of these mushrooms and moss. And it really hit me. Like, I had this mental image of the bulldozers coming into the jungle and destroying everything. And I realized that, this is a log like that big around and this long, and there's like 1,000 things on it. Like, literally, I mean, I'm sure at least, 50 species between the insects and the plants. And it was really stunning to realize the density of life forms that exist in the jungle. I mean, we all know that, but man, when you're actually confronted, and I refuse to sit on the log because I'm like, I'm not destroying all this stuff, and so it actually turned out that the purpose of going into the jungle in the dark was for me to let go of all of this dissonant energy and experience the interconnectedness with the totality of the consciousness in the jungle, which is what happened. And it was really remarkable. The feelings that I had internally corresponded precisely with, you know, an owl, or certain creatures would make sounds when I had certain feelings pass through me. And as I stood there longer and longer and longer, and I was more and more calm, the jungle, all of the living stuff, it was coming closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, until I was just absolutely surrounded by a cacophony of insects and animals. And so yeah, that was a big bonding moment, I guess, between myself and the Amazon rainforest, that I never thought I would see. And so we went back, and the shaman, this was an amazing instance of the sort of precognition that happens a lot with ayahuasca. He said, you know, when you see your mother, when you get back to their farm, don't interact with her. Go directly to your yurt and say everything that you would want to say to her to the smoke. He had clearly anticipated what was about to happen. Unfortunately, I never made it to the yurt. My mom and my stepfather had taken a hit of acid that was disagreeing with my mom. And, you know, earlier in the live stream, I mentioned that I had a very complicated relationship with her. That's sort of an understatement. So we got into this huge argument that got absolutely, it was really, really, really bad. I'll spare you the details, but it was really bad. And so eventually I went to the yurt and, you know, left the next day. And the next time I saw my mom, she was in a big glass box because she was dead. She committed suicide maybe 10 days after this crazy argument, which, of course, you know, no one wants that. I mean, you don't want to lose your mom, but, you know, to have this terrible interaction, and then, you know, and I had been hearing the threats of suicide since I was literally a toddler. You know, my mom would talk about how she, you know, she would like spell suicide as if that would lessen the impact of hearing it. And, you know, even as a, you know, maybe 6 or 7-year-old, I understood that she was a single mom, and the reason that she was threatening suicide was that she had this burden of these children. And I would think, you know, oh, okay, well, I'll kill myself so that you don't have this burden anymore. And you know what I mean? So it was really, really damaging, and it went on my entire life. As I got older, I had a girlfriend. Actually, the last girlfriend that I had before I went to Ecuador had the same psychological disorders as this girl. So I was, you know, it's like the universe prepared me before I went down to see my mom by showing me as an adult what I had been dealing with my entire life in the form of this other person, which is also extraordinary. But yeah, so, you know, that last exchange that I had with her, I had the language, you know, I knew now what projection was. I knew what selective perception was. You know, I had experienced this thing of like, people with NPD do a lot of crazy shit. I mean, really crazy shit. And, you know, I had labels for all of this stuff, and I realized, like, holy crap, you know, this last girlfriend was my mom. It was, you know, okay, so speaking of girls, that's kind of how I ended up back down here. So after my mom committed suicide, and man, it's crazy how they dispense of people down here. They brought her big glass coffin out and put it in the middle of this like chapel, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but the floor opened up and it swallowed the coffin, and you could see the flames like flickering all around it. It was a crazy thing. Yeah, I had no idea that that's how they did it, but that is how they do it. By the way, you guys, our channel is demonetized, so all the support that we get comes from you guys. There are a few options for supporting us in the chat with PayPal, Zelle, cryptocurrency. Actually, it's not in the chat, so let me copy all of that stuff and throw it in there real quick. Also, I have the Patreon, where you can join secret streams. I want to mention, if you are a patron and you didn't see the last one, please do yourself a favor and go watch it. It's, I think, probably the most important content that I've made. I'm actually considering posting it, just the second half of it, for maybe a week as like a little bit of marketing to show people that are not patrons what they're missing, because it was just really powerful. So if you're a patron, don't miss that. And we really do appreciate the support. So, suicide of my mom. Lowered down into belching flames. And then I returned to the United States, but not before linking up with my partner. And this is another area where ayahuasca really played an incredible role. And it also gave whatever it is that ayahuasca really is. I don't think anyone understands it really. But it gave me more opportunities to see its ability to like tell you the future in ways that shouldn't be possible. And so after the first set of ceremonies before my mom's suicide, I went into a coffee shop a few days after the last ceremony, and I saw this beautiful young girl, 14 years my junior, and you know, it was like one of those moments from like that movie Wayne's World. You know, he sees the girl and everything stops and there's like sparkles and there's this song playing, and you know what I mean? It was literally like that, but I just sort of shook it off and thought, well, you know, she's awfully young and it's just silly. So I just got some food and forgot about this moment. But Pachamama somehow was back in my head saying, she will have your children. And I was like, sure. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. And so I didn't talk to her really or anything much. I just got my food and yeah, Dreamweaver. And kind of wrote it off as like this just crazy thought, you know. And everywhere I went for the next week, she was there somehow. And it's not, you know, she wasn't like Facebook stalking me and showing up. It was just coincidence, you know, that everywhere I went, she would also be. And so inevitably we talked. And then the night before I was going back to the United States, we drank San Pedro together, and that's when we kind of realized that there was something happening. Well, actually, there was one other, I guess, important element to this. I actually said to her, you know, what would be perfect is if we could drink ayahuasca 3 nights in a row, because that's just the best way to do it. And so the shaman that I had been working with called me the next day and said, hey, I'm having 3 ceremonies in a row this weekend. I was like, huh. So I called Enrica back and said, actually, there's 3 ceremonies in a row this weekend, and she agreed to come. And on the 3rd night, the Bobinsana plant, which is an amazing, it's related to acacia or mimosa. It has the, you know, pink and white puffs of like, they almost look like hairs. Beautiful plant. It grows along waterways everywhere here. And so it has the effect of opening the heart. And one of the things that I realized about myself through all this process of medicine taking and everything is that due to my mother's mental illness, I had developed emotional walls that were just, you know, almost impenetrable. In fact, I realized that the only person, being, whatever, that I had ever really loved was my dog, who had died shortly before I came to Ecuador. That I, you know, this unconditional love you can actually feel. To me, up until this point, with the exception of the dog, when the dog died, love or positive feelings towards anyone was a purely psychological thing. It's difficult to explain, and it's not that I was like a sociopath, really. It's not like that, but it was just like everything that I did came from a cerebral place. And my relationships with people were based on that, not like feelings. I didn't have those really. Very rare. And so the third night of the ceremony with the Bobinsana, I realized that I wasn't even necessarily romantically interested in Enrica, but I really wanted her to just be okay, and she had a lot of stuff that she needed to work through, as people often do, everyone really. And I experienced this just unconditional love in a way that I could actually feel for the first time in my life. And so there was a huge bond, but it was still totally in the arena of friendship. So after maybe a week after that, we drank the San Pedro together, and then I had to tell her at the end of the ceremony that I was leaving that night at 5 o'clock in the morning to fly back to the United States to go to a second funeral for my mother with her relatives. And these people were not, her father was autistic, and the stepmother had ignored the fact that her brother was raping my mom from the time that she was 7 years old or something like that. And so, I actually had that woman put her hand on my arm and look me in the eyes, and her eyes are like bulging out of her head, like if you've ever seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that character, the bad guy at the end, his eye, it was crazy. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Bulging out of her sockets, and what could have possibly happened to drive her to this? And I was just stunned, like, lady, you walked into the room while she was being raped as a child and said, "Excuse me," and closed the door. You're seriously asking me this right now? I mean, it was one of the most insane things that I've ever experienced. And coming from me, that's a lot. Trust me. So to my surprise, Enrica decided she's gonna fly to the States and come and stay with me for a few months. And I was supposed to grow a crop. And there was a lady that I was working with whose family her father in particular was one of the scariest people in Northern California, and that's saying a lot. We called him Black Bart, and he was sketchy. I mean, he was a PhD from Harvard, close ties to the Grateful Dead. In fact, this woman and her sisters and brother would do Chinese New Year on stage with the Grateful Dead every year, where they had this dragon, and the kids would be inside dancing the dragon. They were always in the dragon. So they connected, and really bad. Bart would, like, all of his neighbors would get busted, and they would not touch his plants. Like, they would drive right by his plants and then go bust even his kids, because he had bought, like, this valley, all of it, in Mendocino. And they would just bust everyone around him and leave. No one ever figured out what exactly his ties were, but so anyways, this woman that owned the property I was going to grow at was his daughter. And that should have been a red flag. But one day I was driving home, and the neighbors had all these pot plants in the front yard, and I needed plants. So I pulled in, plus they were the neighbors, I hadn't met them, so I pulled in and I said, "Hey, I need a bunch of plants." And they said, "Are you sure about that?" And I was like, "Why?" And they said, the sheriff is definitely going to bust her this year if she doesn't get all the permits to make everything totally legal. She knows this. So suddenly I've got Enrica flying in from South America, and I discover that this lady has set me up, basically, and I'd noticed that she didn't really want to spend any money on anything, and I didn't really care because I could bankroll it. Remember that my partners had cleaned me out, so I came home expecting to have like a lot of money, and I had barely any, but I had some. So I realized I have a serious problem. And I call her up and call her out, and it becomes clear that she has no intention of spending the money to get the place legal. I know the cops are coming, so bad situation. Enrica's there. This all happened like a couple days before she arrived, so she gets there, and I don't know what the hell to do. So I just load up my stuff, and we go on tour with Dead and Company, right? I mean, what else are you gonna do? And we just followed Dead and Company around for a little while. Not sustainable, really. At one point, we ended up living with Bob Dylan's ex-wife, Ruth Tyrangel, which that was a mind blower. She's actually Ruth in the Honky Tonk Saloon from that song Stuck Inside of Memphis with the Mobile Blues Again. You know, I used to drive around listening to the Grateful Dead's version of that song, singing at the top of my lungs, and when it hit me that I was like, literally I was playing the song sitting on the floor with the character from the song sitting on the couch in front of me, and it just really hit me. Like I choked on the line about Ruth in the Honky Tonk Saloon, and she saw my face and she's like, yep, and she picked up a record from her record collection and held it up, and it was obviously a caricature of her, and it was hand drawn by Bob Dylan. And you know, that's when I realized, like, wow, this really is Ruth Tyrangel. I've made videos about that whole story, which is absolutely mind-blowing, how all that transpired, so I'm not going to go into it again at the present moment. But basically, I had lost everything. I had been cleaned out by my partners. I knew that the pot industry was collapsing, and it probably wouldn't be worth it for me to try to do it all again, you know, to borrow money from some scary person again, and, you know, go through the whole. Also, you know, our trimmers the year before killed the neighbor, like decapitated him, and it was just getting scarier and scarier and scarier up there in NorCal. So I wasn't really, I had come out there wanting to be a legitimate medical marijuana provider. I had no idea that it wasn't, you know, I was naive, I guess. I was expecting a bunch of like progressive, forward-thinking psychedelic people in the mountains growing pot, and instead it was like cartel, you know, and there were Russian mob around, and people just kill people all the time without thinking twice. And I mean, it's just, more people go missing between Laytonville, which we called Satanville, and Eureka, California than like anywhere else in the continental United States. Serial killers, I mean, it's just crazy. It has its upsides too, don't get me wrong. I'm planning on going back. Love Mendocino. But yeah, so I wasn't in a big hurry to remain in the industry. You know, I was sick of it. I just didn't want anything to do with it anymore. And so I sold my truck and bought a ticket to Ecuador. And we were staying with Enrica's sister for like 2 weeks before we came down here. And so during that time, I set up a Shopify store, and I thought, well, you know, I have a little bit of money. The inheritance from my mom's estate was expected to come within a year. So it's not huge, but enough for me to start a little business and get moving again. So I just thought, well, Shopify store, sell the truck, go to Ecuador. You can last a year down there. So I fly down to Ecuador, and about 5 days after we landed, I get a notification on my phone, and it's from Shopify, and it says that our store ranked in the top 25% for traffic. If you don't know anything about drop shipping, that means you're about to make a lot of money. I had succeeded. So I was thrilled. I ran downstairs and told Enrica, you know, that showed her, and then like a minute later after the notification, I got another one saying that they had disabled our store due to the high traffic and the fact that we were overseas. You know, again, if you're not familiar with Shopify, the whole point is that you can run your business from anywhere on the planet. They said you don't need a business license until you get to a certain point, so I didn't bother to get the business license, and I guess we hit that threshold right away. So there was nothing I could do from South America. I needed proof of an electric bill or whatever, all this stuff that I could not have access to from down here. So now I'm low on money, and my Shopify store, which was supposed to pay the bills, has been disabled and is gone. And I had spent most of the money that I had left getting it going. So I decided to start a YouTube channel, and around that time, Enrique learned to make rape. And I had continued to work with ayahuasca. We're moving along in time, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, because it's not really relevant to how I ended up in the Amazon. But I continued working with the plant medicines, and I had been working with psychedelics and studying psychology and all the different forms of mysticism, meditation, ever since I was a kid. The mystery schools, I had been studying like seriously since junior high school. So I had a lot of background in this stuff, and I realized that psychedelics were getting popular and that I had a lot of really crazy stories to tell. So I thought, well, the chances of actually making any money from a YouTube channel are pretty small, so we'll see. And then it kind of took off. Bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. At one point, I think we had over 14,000 people in a live stream. And so for quite some time, our main source of income was, some plant medicine stuff, rape and whatnot, that we shipped around the world. And I would hold an occasional ceremony, and the YouTube channel got monetized really, really quickly. And, it was crazy to think that I had just like bailed out of my life. Looking back, I realized there was definitely an element of like nervous breakdown, I think, with my mom's suicide and the really nasty last reaction that we had. It was not like, if I could go back and do it all over again with a clear head, I don't know that I would have done what I did. I think, if my mom hadn't killed herself, I probably would have just continued pursuing music in California. We actually had started to make progress with the project that I was in at the time. To the extent that Brian and I, the bass player, the last time that we went to a gig, we got out of the car and there was like a crowd of people that started cheering, and it kind of hit me like, that's significant. Also, we had like this army of scantily clad girls that started showing up, and they would go to other places and round up all these, basically wearing lingerie, and go and round up all of these guys and bring them to our shows. So, it was clear that something was happening. Also, the last show that we played, we had Jay Lane on drums, who was the original founding drummer of Primus. And he also played in like all the Grateful Dead's offshoot bands Further, Rat Dog. Now he's playing occasionally with Dead and Company. So it was really crazy for me to just abandon my life's work. That still messes with me every single day of my life. I'm not gonna lie. It's really difficult to come to terms with the fact that I did that. Particularly at that timing, I'm sure Brian's not thrilled about it either. Anyways, though, so, I was really pleased that I had been able to reinvent myself on the fly and, just bail out of California with almost nothing, land in a foreign country, and the Shopify store blows up, and then it gets taken away for no apparent reason out of nowhere immediately. And then I managed to get these other things going, and the YouTube channel. And then in, I think it was 2020, we were demonetized because I made videos about how awful Biden-Harris are. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not anything. I don't like, any of them. They're all just leaving a slime trail behind them. You know what I mean? I don't, but I made a video about Harris's record as a prosecutor, and a few days later, my channel was demonetized, which was a huge blow, because what happens is the algorithm deprioritizes your stuff, so it actually buries it. And it's come out that it goes across platforms. They also deleted my Facebook page. So that was really crippling. You know what I mean? We basically lost everything in the blink of an eye again, you know? So we managed to, you know, I was like, what am I going to do? I just have to keep going. So I wanted to go into the jungle and, you know, try to get involved with indigenous rights activism or preserving the rainforest, both really. And also I felt, you know, called to work more deeply with ayahuasca. And so I got a hold of a Shuar guy through a friend, and he said, oh yeah, come on, you know, we'll go out into deep into the jungle to Shuar territory. I've always wanted to see an anaconda in the wild. So, you know, he said, oh yeah, I know where there's tons of anaconda. We can go out and drink medicine. And you know, and I was like, okay, well, I want to document everything for my YouTube channel. And he said, oh yeah, that's great, fine, whatever. And so we went to the Amazon to a place called Shell first, which is where the airplane, you can find this in my shorts, the airplane where the missionaries that were speared, basically when the missionaries landed, the Shuar just killed everyone on the plane, all 5 of them. And so that was made into a movie, and, you know, lots of people know about it. But I didn't know that it was that plane. You know, we would walk by the plane. They had it on a pole, which seemed like in terrible taste, retrospectively knowing what plane it was, but it looked like it had been speared, and it was just like on the side of the road. And we would walk by it, you know, every day going to town or whatever. And so we missed our meeting with Night Chop, who was this Shuar guy that we were going to meet and go into the jungle. And I happened to go on a plant walk with the curator of Omare, which is like an ethnobotanical plant reserve, I guess, ethnobotanical garden. Really cool story. The Shuar woman that he is married to actually restored it with a group of indigenous women from being pasture land. It had been totally wiped out, and so they replanted everything and brought the jungle back to life. And so you walk through, and you know, they tell you about all the plants and whatnot. So he mentioned Misawai as, you know, a place where there was a Quechua community, which is where we live now. And I said, okay, well, we can't get a hold of this guy. It turned out he disappeared into the jungle for a year and just came out again a couple of months ago. His cousin, somehow I managed to I didn't do it on purpose even. She came up in my, like, suggested, I guess. And I noticed that her name was very similar. So I sent her a message, and it was his cousin. And she said, yeah, he just disappeared into the jungle. Nobody knows what happened to him. A month or so later, I got a message from him. But the point is, since we missed that contact, I thought, well, let's just go ourselves, I guess. So we went to Misawai, and we were living in a sort of ayahuasca retreat. Scott is a very nice Canadian guy. It's a great property, but it was too expensive to just live there forever. We had almost no income. So we went to eat in town, and the waiter said, you know, oh, there's this lady that has a house for rent down the street. I'll put you guys in contact. And so we contacted the woman, and she said, oh no, I don't want to rent it. You can just live there. And so, you know, we had this crazy mission to just go to the Amazon and live there. And suddenly we have a free house, which was remarkable. And then after we'd been there for a few months, one day there's a lady at the gate, and she's like, hey, you know, you guys come out, talk to me. And she said, yeah, I have to go to Canada. Can you guys house sit for me? And that's the property that we're at now, which we have actually leased this time. But, you know, it was just mind blowing because I didn't like the house in town that much. It was great to have a free place to stay in the Amazon, but it was just not very. Uh, it was almost like a prison. You know, the way the front yard was, like everything was concrete and very square, and just not welcoming. And also it was in town, so we wanted to be deeper in the jungle, and so we go out, and it's a 50-hectare property with a cacao museum. It's right on the Napo River. It's a lodge. By the way, we're still having retreats until the end of October. If you guys are interested in hermetic magic or plant medicine, we're running until the end of October. So we have a few more slots open. If you guys are interested in that, you can send me an email. The email is in the description. And so we went and we stayed and took care of this property for a few months. She came back, and so we went back to Vilcabamba, and it's so crazy. Like literally the day before the woman that owns this property contacted us, I said, I wish we could just go back to Pucaorco, which is the name of the Quechua community where we live, and take over Elizabeth's property again. And so, but I was thinking, you know, how are we going to have income? Like what, you know, that's not really a viable, plus it's not an option. And so the next day we get a message from Elizabeth saying, hey, do you guys know anybody that might want to lease this property? And, you know, so we have the 5 rooms, and I built a ceremonial building up in the jungle, and I thought, well, let's see if we can have retreats for 6 months and try go ahead and do it. And so far we're still here. Rent's paid. I mean, you know, it's not like we're like thriving or something. The government, well, it wasn't the government, it was actually the indigenous, got tired of being exploited and stepped on. And so they shut the whole country down right as we were like opening. And we actually had a group of people that had just arrived that had to get sent back. So that really set us back. It was about 30 days, I think, that no one could come into Ecuador or go out. And so, yeah, that really, it was just horrible timing. I felt terrible for the people that had come, and they waited, you know, in a hotel for like a week. And, you know, I would look at Quito, and there's walls of flames and military everywhere. So, you know, and then also for advertising for the period after, it was like, what's the point? You know, people are Google Ecuador, and it's like riot gear and flames. But that's not normal. Ecuador is actually really chill. The people here are really respectful and nice, and you know, the basic decency of the people here was really a powerful lesson for me when I compare how people are in the United States. Even people that are like good people, it's not the same. There's a much more genuine kind of wholesomeness with the people here. They're you know, just really good people. You know, the way the cops treat you, even if you're being arrested, you know, is they're respectful. And no, I wouldn't say the locals are cool with foreigners, mostly because of the exploitation. I mean, they're nice, but you know, the relationship with the indigenous people is definitely strained. The mestizo population, it's not quite as bad, but you know, they're not hostile, and sometimes they'll be friendly and welcoming, and you know, but yeah, there's, you know, it's not tense, I guess, put it that way. And there are, you know, people that I work with, like Mama Celia, local shamans, that are just awesome, and you know, so case by case basis. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely tensions with foreigners, for sure. But you know, it's to be expected when you have people here, like the woman that owns this property. The minimum wage is, it works out to $300 a month, or four twenty five, and she actually insisted at one point that we, when we had workers do something for us, that we pay them less than the legal minimum, so that we don't screw up her ability to exploit them. And this is kind of how people think. Like, it's just, you're entitled to exploit people because you're Canadian or European. I wouldn't use the terminology white, because black people come here and do it too. It's really not, it's not that. It's anyone from like European or, North America, come here with that attitude. Like, you retire and then you can go and stand on the backs of little brown people so that you can be comfortable without very much money. So, there's resentment about that, I think, which is totally reasonable. But yeah, you guys asked, so that is that's the story of how we ended up living in the Amazon. My life exploded. My mom committed suicide, and then my life exploded, I guess, and crash landed in the Andes with no real plan. And, I didn't mention my health struggles. That was a really huge setback. So a lot of those, the years that I didn't say much about, the reason I didn't have much to say is that, I was pretty much incapacitated for the better part of 3 years. So we really fell behind. It's been really hard financially, but I think that the inspirational aspect of this is that even without much of a plan, hardly any money at all, and while struggling with totally debilitating health problems, we have still managed to put ourselves in a position, to lease this property and have something like success. We've at least managed to survive. I didn't mention that we had a son sort of on accident. Abortion's legal in this country, and I'm not really a huge fan. I'm not in favor of litigation against it. I don't think it's the government's business, but I don't really necessarily think it's great unless you have to, and I don't know that I felt that we had to, that we could manage one way or another. So in the midst of all these health problems, and I even had a surgery on my jaw that failed, that cost a bunch of money, and it failed anyways. But yeah, so I was struggling with health problems for a number of years. Coming to the Amazon and consuming all of these anti-inflammatory plants, and uña de gato and bobinsana, and actually I have a tea that I'm drinking right now that has those plants, and then also ayahuasca leaves, just not in a psychoactive amount. It's loaded with all sorts of beneficial compounds and brain building, harmalas, and so yeah, all of these plants have really helped me to improve my health, and I'm definitely not 100% still, but I'm getting there. And so yeah, I mean, that's basically the story as quickly as I could. My phone is dying, and I can't charge it, so we have about 10% left. If you guys have any questions for me, you have to be patient because I have a lag before I'll see it in the chat. But shoot if you like. Yeah, and so, I guess as far as the retreats here go, we have only 5 rooms, so they're very small groups, and we go out into the jungle, hikes to waterfalls and Tapir Island, which is, it's in the city, but it's an island in between 2 rivers, where there are tapir and squirrel monkeys. There's the capuchin troupe in town that are hilarious. I've actually gotten a couple of viral videos out of those monkeys. They steal lighters and they light their fur in order to cook the bugs, we're assuming, and then they eat the burned fur with the bugs in it. So they're actually non-human animals that are cooking food, which is really just a mind-blowing thought that the monkeys here are cooking food, but they are. So, no one gives them lighters. That wouldn't be cool, but they'll drop in through the ceiling and steal them. When the clerk turns their back, they'll drop through a hole in the ceiling, grab a lighter. Or the funniest thing is when someone goes to light a cigarette and the monkeys drop down and they take the lighter out of the person's hand, and they're going like, what in the hell, because they'll just use their tail, drop down, grab it, and they're just gone with the lighter. And then the recent one, one of our guests was here, and if you have an onion, they will all come and get in your lap. Even you don't have to have an onion. You can throw an onion into the park, and they will get the onion and run into someone's lap. It's got to be a monkey superstition. That's the only explanation for this I can come up with. But they grab the onion and they find a human lap, and then they break it open and rub it all over themselves to get the bugs to stay away. And in this particular case, the entire troop piled into our guest's lap one at a time. So by the time the video's over, he has 7 capuchins stacked in his lap, rubbing the onions all over, peeing all over him. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. It is on the channel somewhere. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. We are demonetized, so we really do appreciate support for the time that we invest in this channel. Also, you can join our Patreon and access secret streams. So we don't have any questions about living in the Amazon or anything. I probably have 10% battery. And of course it's great, the only drawback really is that you have limited access to stuff, and here in Miss Hawaii, the bugs aren't so bad. I mean, I have no bug spray on. I'm sitting outside in the Amazon rainforest in the dark, and have you guys seen me swat anything? I mean, it's not bad most days. There are days where I'll have to cover everything up in order to not get eaten alive. But most of the time, it's pretty comfortable. Cannabis is definitely not legal. I think small, it's like 4 grams or something. I don't think they'll arrest you for. But yeah, no, cannabis is definitely not legal. Really, nothing is legal. It's sort of a gray area here with the plant medicines. Mostly, if you're indigenous, you're all right. We have indigenous shaman that we work with, so that we have that taken care of. Oh, by the way, that's part of the retreat. I don't know if I mentioned that, but we have like Mama Celia, and if you want to travel, there is an additional cost attached to going to see Miguel Chiriop down in Shuar country. It's worth it. If you've never seen someone channel interdimensional language before, it's definitely, I mean, when you're watching this happen, there's like no doubt in your mind that that's what you're observing. Yeah, we have coca leaves in this area, but they're much more mild in the jungle than they are in the Andes. Not really sure why. There's different strains, but I've also heard that altitude has something to do with it. They still work here in the jungle, but they're definitely way, way, way more potent. Yeah, John, well, the thing about that is that we probably won't be here next year. We're only going until October. And then I'm hoping that we can go back to California, because I am still interested in performing music now that the COVID regulations are gone. Brian, my bass player, is still willing. I kind of want to try to pick up right where I left off, like a complete lunatic at 40